So just coming out the other end of an emotional ride. So for about 3 days I was going through this process, which is pretty incredible considering these things would usually last for months or even years in the past. So day one for me was getting really stuck in the surface layer emotions of anger and frustration and just spitting out energy, just feeling really on edge, really stressed, really frustrated. And what I find tends to happen is a lot of us get stuck in that surface layer and we can start to point fingers. Sometimes we're blaming others, or we get resentful and we're projecting. Sometimes we start to blame ourselves or shame ourselves, or start beating ourselves up. And we can get really stuck and we can resist the deeper emotions that are trying to come through, because they can be quite painful and quite intense and overwhelming to really go into. And often when we go into those deeper layers, it almost feels like, am I going to survive this? Can I get out of this? Is it ever going to end? And that can be really overwhelming in itself, and that can cause us to go into shutdown and different coping mechanisms, looking for something to ease that pain. For me in the past, it was alcohol, or even spiritually bypassing, looking for different spiritual practices to numb the pain. What I find really fascinating now, through years of practice of riding the waves, I was able to go through this process in about 3 days. So like I said, that first day was a lot of frustration, a lot of just irritation, and there was definitely some projection that I was able to catch in the moment and be like, you know what, I'm actually just feeling frustrated. And when I really just owned my story and my feelings and just expressed that this is what I'm feeling, and I came into acceptance, I found inner peace. I went to bed quite early that night feeling quite exhausted, because when you use a lot of energy, frustrated and stressing out and worrying and going over things in your head, it takes a lot of energy. So I was quite exhausted. And so I went to sleep quite early with Theo, and then day 2 came through and I was full of brain fog. Like, I couldn't really get into my work, which I usually love to do. I get up early and I'm diving in, and there was no clarity there, and I just couldn't really think clearly or think straight. And so that created frustration, because I was like, I've got things to do. I can't be in this state right now. It's annoying, it's irritating. But I had to just be with it, and I knew that this was part of the process. And what was coming up for me was, is this going to end? Because I've got things to do. And I just kept surrendering that and kept coming into acceptance, and like, this is where I'm at. It's not time for me to do these things that I think I should be doing right now. It's time for me to hold space for me and to ride this wave. And so for the entire day, I had this brain fog and lack of energy. We went outside and we watched the sunset and grounded in the earth, and I found that really, really helpful. Quite a bit of frustration came up at the end of the day. So again, going into a bit of a deeper layer, but it was still quite surface. And I was getting frustrated and really avoiding the deeper layer. But I enjoyed some time at the beach and just practiced presence and allowed myself to be exactly where I was. And I had thought, I'll get into some stuff tonight. And then I took Theo to bed, and again I was absolutely exhausted, and so I passed out quite early again. And then day 3, this was on Wednesday, I unexpectedly burst the bottle of emotion. So I went into a deeper layer, and that happens when we allow ourselves to feel where we're at. I wasn't forcing myself to get to this place. I was allowing myself to be frustrated. I was allowing myself to be unproductive and be in the brain fog and get curious about it. And then so day 3 arose, and I was crying quite heavily throughout the day, kind of in blocks. It would just come out of nowhere, and I didn't exactly know what I was crying about. I just knew that it was a deep sadness, a deep grief, and a lot of different things that felt quite heavy. And I was just letting it pour out without needing to know exactly what it was about. I didn't need to label the emotion either. I wasn't saying I'm sad, I'm this, I'm that. I was just feeling. I was absolutely present, and I just cried when I needed to cry. And it was really amazing because it felt similar to when I was pregnant with Theo, and I would just let myself cry. And I had so much healing in my pregnancy. And it felt very similar, where I was just allowing this energy to pour out and release. But there were moments where I was like, I don't think this is ever going to end. I think I'm just going to cry forever. Like, this is like massive, and I don't even know where it's coming from. And it was quite overwhelming and scary. It brought up a lot of fear around, I need to be this or I need to be that. I need to be productive. I've got things to do. If I don't do things, this will happen. And so it did bring up some worry and some stresses. But the more I was able to just lean into the discomfort and feel what I was feeling, it came into a bit of ease, where I was able to gain a lot of clarity around what this whole process has been about. And so I've had so many insights coming through. And I really had to sit with this. It wasn't time to share in those moments. I just needed I needed to feel it, and I needed to express myself just through my emotion. And then when it did come time to express and share about what was coming up, I reached out to a good friend, which is quite a big thing for me to really reach out in that moment that I was in the stuff. Because often it's once I've come out and I've figured it out and I've got all these insights, that's when I'll share. But like, oh, it's all good now, I can share. But in this moment, I was like, no, I've got to reach out in this moment when I'm going through it, and allow myself to be supported. And it was quite fascinating that when I reached out and when I shared the deepest things that were coming through, there was a massive shift for me. And I started to lift up, and I started to come into a state of ease and inner peace, because I allowed myself to be supported. And I didn't even need that friend to respond straight away. Just by sharing it and allowing myself to be vulnerable really helped me to move through this process. And then from there, I was able to open up to Liam and share with him just the different things that were coming up, not necessarily that this is what it is, this is it. I wasn't going into fix it or analyze mode. I was just allowing myself to share whatever was coming up. And as I started to pour out through my voice, I got to the core of what was really going on. And it wasn't really about all the stuff that I thought it was about, that I was sharing and speaking about. It was about a core thing that I've been holding on to, that has been a driving force in what I do now. But it's also been something that's been holding me back, because there's been a fear that I won't achieve a goal that I've had for many years. And as soon as I voiced that, I was able to cry and release that fear. I was pretty exhausted after this day, after day 3 as well, with all the tears. And so I went up to bed and laid with my little Theo, and had a beautiful night's sleep. It was about 5 or 6 hours, but I woke up early in the morning and I felt very different, very clear. Like the brain fog had lifted. I felt at ease in my body. I wasn't like, I've got to get all these things done. It was just, actually, I'm just going to start with getting up, going downstairs, making my coffee, and just sitting and just being, and see what comes through, what I feel to do in that moment. And it's been really amazing, because on that day 3, or day 4 it was, when I woke up, I felt so refreshed. And usually after a day of crying, I'm all puffy-eyed, and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to have to deal with that all day. And I actually did a video to share, but it didn't upload. And I was like, oh, I should probably have puffy eyes or something. And I looked into the camera and there was no puffy eyes. Even today, it's probably the least puffy my eyes have been in a really long time. I've always thought that they're naturally puffy. But I actually believe that the puffiness comes from not resting, not sleeping well, being in high stress states, and the go and all of that. And I found it quite fascinating that after I had this massive release, the puffy eyes have just disappeared, and I'm feeling so much more refreshed and at ease, and open and receptive, connecting more deeply with my partner and with friends, and feeling like almost like a new being, like more authentic and more connected to who I truly am. And that's just one thing that can kind of like come through when you really allow yourself to feel. And so I wanted to share that because often there is this fear to go into those deeper emotions and to really allow yourself to lean in and to feel. But it's quite transformational when you lean in without trying to fix it, without trying to analyze it, without trying to avoid it or resist it or force it in a certain way. Sometimes we try to force ourselves to feel things, to have these beautiful transformations, but it's not something we can force. It's something that we surrender to and we allow to move at its own pace, whether it lasts a few hours, a day, a few days, a few weeks. I still have processes that can last up to sometimes 7 to 10 days, and it's really intense. But the difference is now that I know that I'm going through a process and I'm receiving every step of the way. Whereas before, when I would be stuck in states of depression or anxiety for days, weeks, months, years, I wasn't really leaning in. I wasn't really coming in with that compassion, that curiosity. I was resisting and using all of my energy to suppress and to push emotions down or push them away, or really being consumed by those different states. I wasn't allowing myself to go within and really get curious about it. So now I know that even when it lasts a little bit longer than it usually does, because it's usually now for me a few hours, when it's a few days or a week, I know it's quite a big process and there's quite a lot to receive from that. But when we come in with that new lens, we're able to receive, we're able to heal, we're able to transform, to receive the gifts of the experience, rather than being in months of pain and suffering before we can receive the gift. We can receive it now. Thank you for listening. I just really felt to share that with you this morning. Sending you so much love. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being you.